develop innovative approaches to woodland management, specifically helping to develop new methods and tools to help managers and owners bring their woodlands either into kind of improved management, help the management processes, or start the management journey for those that aren't currently actively managing their woodlands. So we're doing this kind of through 3 different channels. The first of which is demonstrating and sharing innovative tools or methods. So this evening is a prime example of that. We're running a range of demonstration events, webinars, seminars, and producing case studies and videos, kind of sharing different people's experiences on their woodland management journeys. We're also supporting innovators. So if you have an idea that you think might help bring more woodlands into management or help owners and managers manage woodlands, then we have expert advice available to assist with the development of that. Now that can be early stage in terms of you've just had a general thought and you want to chat to a forestry expert about it, or it could be something that's a bit more developed, so a tool that already exists and you're looking to expand the capabilities further. One good example of this is the WildTrack Pro platform, which we had a webinar about before Christmas. So I'd encourage you to look at our YouTube channel and have a look at that interesting tool to help woodland owners access the deer management grants and meet the requirements of Forestry Commission. So I'd really encourage you to go back and have a look at that. And finally, we're also developing innovative tools ourselves. So when I say ourselves, I mean the Northwoods group of organisations that are working together to kind of deliver this programme. And those are on the MyForest platform. So MyForest is a mapping tool, and we're developing the capabilities that they have available to its users. At the moment, they're working on an improved inventory function to help you as woodland owners and managers undertake woodland inventories in a slightly quicker process, and also to improve the store of information available to you. So that's kind of what we're doing. There's quite a lot there. Hopefully you have signed up to our newsletter. If not, I'd encourage you to sign up to the newsletter and you can stay up to date with all of our events, along with the different tools that are currently being developed. So without further ado, I think I'll hand over to Guy to talk us through kind of what they've done at Birling Estate to diversify the incomes that their woodlands have that provide them. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rosanna. I will just try and share my screen. Okay, does that come through okay?
Yeah, we just need to, there we go, yeah, hide the...
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Right, okay, thank you very much. So yeah, I'll sort of take you through the story of what's happened here over the last 10 years or so. So we are based down in, down in the southeast. So we're just southeast of London, we're in northwest Kent. The blue you can see there is the ANOB, which is now protected landscape. So we're sort of fully with the red dot there in the middle. We're fully within the area of outstanding natural beauty, or the protected landscape on the North Downs. And here's a plan of the estate, and this yellow line that runs through the middle, through the top here, is all triple SI. So along the edge here, it's chalk grassland, and then runs through the southern section of the woodland. So we've got, the estate's about 1,800 acres in total, and there's about 700 acres of woodland, half of which is Sweet Chestnut coppice, which is mostly that block at the top of the screen there, the top of the hill. And the circles there, I'm going to talk to you about 2 things in particular. One is our woodland campsite that we set up. So that's marked in red on the top of the hill, and then the blue is where our sawmill is in the main farmyard. And just by sort of way of background, so I spent 20 years as an environmental engineer, working on various sustainable exemplar projects. There's a few here, there's 2 or 3 here, National Trust headquarters, and then we did the Woodland Trust headquarters, and the top one is the Hive Library in Worcester. and a number of those were timber, solid timber, so mass timber frame constructions. So we spent a lot of time kind of looking at materials that were going to be used, and I would work with the architects, kind of advising them on the sustainability issues, and doing some of the kind of the engineering. And so that sort of the 20 years in construction has given me an interest in working with timber and building with timber and trying to use it and sequester carbon within construction materials. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is our campsite. So the reason I got asked to do this, I think, was Neil, who runs Reheat. He came to a presentation in 2017 I did for the CLA, and I think at that point we'd just sort of got the camping going properly. So we started in 2012, and at that point we just did it under a 28-day notice. So we just had people coming in for the weekend over the summer weeks, and then as that started to get more popular, we put in a planning application after about 3 years to be able to have 50 pitches. So it's 50 pitches over 30 acres of woodland. So it's pretty well spaced out. And then in 2017, we got permission to, so the original one was a temporary permission. It was a temporary 5-year permission. And then eventually we, in 2017, got them to turn that into permanent. So it's still seasonal, but we could open every year. And then we've built that up over the years. And for the last sort of 3 or 4 years, we've been hitting 6,000 to 7,000 people a year going through. And it's about a third of those are children. So one of the key things when I first set it up, I set it up because I was walking with the dogs up in the woods, and there are no footpaths through there. So I'd pop up there once a year when the bluebells were out with the dogs, and it's such a beautiful area. It felt like a really good thing to be able to share it. And it was it used to be a World War II training camp. So there are, in fact, there's tarmac roads and old concrete hut bases and things dotted through it. So there was basic infrastructure that allowed us to get into the woods without too much difficulty. So in terms of sort of getting cars in and being able to park them, we didn't have to do too much in the first place. And it started off at a pretty sort of basic level, and then each year we've kind of invested more and sort of tried to smarten it up. But I think what's quite interesting in terms of background is that we're in the green belt, we're in the national landscape. It's ancient woodland. It's also like local wildlife site, and we're right next to the SSSI. So it's kind of about as protected as you can possibly get. And so we've worked very closely with Kent Wildlife Trust all the way through, developing conservation plans, and trying to kind of take the view that what we're not trying to do is say that the fact it was a training camp and they destroyed a lot of the ground in effect 80 years ago. We're not trying to say it's not ancient woodland anymore because of that. What we're trying to say is that it is ancient woodland. Come in and enjoy it. And a key thing all the way through has been trying to get children in particular and families kind of engaged in the woods, and with a view that we want them to understand it and grow to love it. We want people to be protecting spaces like this over the coming decades. And if people, if they're not aware of it and don't appreciate it, then they're not going to want to love it, and they're not going to want to protect it. So that's always been a very important part of how we operate. But as you can see, the left-hand side there, I mean, they're the showers. We've got 4 showers, and we have a number of composting loos dotted around, and they take the sawdust from the sawmill, gets composted down, and then gets spread on the fields later on. So we went through a sort of rebranding exercise about 3 years ago, and that's kind of, things have really started to move on since then. There's this kind of core thing that came through, this sort of what we've called a being on a mission to inspire a love of the woods. Like I was saying earlier, it's all about getting children engaged, and I think that was the thing that has really driven us on. So it's not about being a campsite. There's something much broader to it than that. And about 3 years ago, to begin with, everyone would just bring their tents in and they'd kind of find a space. And then over time, we worked out where to put footpaths in, and we were very specific about where people would go. So every pitch has got a name. It's pre-allocated to people. And about 2 or 3 years ago, we started to put in some fixed bell tents. And part of the idea behind that was to try and kind of open it up to people who weren't such hardcore campers, or possibly people who they haven't got the kit. Half of the family might not be quite so keen on it, and it kind of guides them in. So we've got half a dozen or so of those that we put in now on these fixed bases, and you can see, they're reasonably well separated. So there's normally sort of minimum of 10 meters between pitches, and in most cases it's more like 30 meters. So here's a kind of plan of where the bell tents are. This is only 1/4 of the woods, but actually the spacing kind of carries on throughout. And even where they're near to each other, it's always very important when you turn around and look in the other direction, all you can see is woodland. So it has this sort of sense of you can feel like you're on your own in the woods, but actually if you turn around, you can just about make out a fire in the distance. So if you're not too comfortable about being stuck in the woods on your own, there is some degree of reassurance there. We started to find after a little while that the pitches would just get sort of slightly larger each year as people would sort of trample around. So a few years ago, we started to build these dead hedges around each one, and it's been fantastic actually. So where we've got dead wood, we stack them up, and it sort of keeps people contained, and actually people seem to really like it. I think they quite like to know where the boundaries are, particularly as we get, you can see here the wood anemones, and then later on you then get bluebells coming through. So I think it helps people to understand, where can they wander around and where should they stay away. And every pitch has a fire pit in it. So one of the other things is, we're very much along the lines of trying to get people. It's part of the experience. I think having a fire is a massive part of the experience, and it's very important that people are able to do it. Unfortunately, with the last 2 or 3 years, we've had some pretty hot years, so we've had to put fire bans in at certain times. We're quite lucky in that it's all sweet chestnut, so actually the sweet chestnut itself is almost impossible to burn until it's seasoned. But it's more about the leaf litter on the floor that, if a spark catches it, it will sort of slowly wend its way across, and the risk is that, a tent or something would catch fire. So we monitor that pretty carefully. And the other thing we do, if there's a yellow weather warning for wind, then we'll shut the site regardless, just from the risk of branches dropping out of the trees. So it's a pretty painful thing to do, when we've got 250, 300 people there to suddenly shut at late notice. But having said that, it's you only need one accident, and it wouldn't be worth thinking about. So we get camper vans coming in as well, and as I was saying, so conservation's been a really important part of it, and we've worked very closely with Camp Wildlife Trust. Obviously the dead hedges I've talked about, and we started to take advantage of citizen science. So we've got one chap who comes who's very much into his moths, so he does annual surveys now when he comes, and he's been finding some fantastic species, so particularly micro moths that live within the chestnut coppice, and he's found, last time we did it earlier last year, found 3 or 4 quite rare species. So it seems to suggest that on the conservation side it's working. And I mean, to be honest, the key thing that came out of the work that Kent Wildlife did and the work that we've done to date has been just to keep coppicing. That's been the most important thing for improving the biodiversity, is to keep the coppicing going. And I think it also helps in terms of educating people to come to visit, so they can understand what that's all about. And then on the ground next door, on the chalk grassland, we've got a mixture of sheep and goats on there, to sort of maintain the grass and try and improve the quality of the habitat. So it makes for an interesting place for people to go and have a wander around. We run these conservation weekends at the start of the season for a couple of weekends, and people who come regularly are invited in, and they help us with sort of tidying up the woods after the winter, spreading wood chip around, just sort of getting ready for the season. And we always put on a little bit of a party for those guys, and it's become quite popular with them now. And we're starting to try and expand that out a little bit more this year, and see if there are more volunteers around other than the people who come regularly. For a number of years, we've been running courses, and the last couple that's become a bit more formalised. So we've now got our School of Nature and Bushcraft, and we have various bushcraft courses. We've got an archery range. We set up an axe range a year or two ago. Forest bathing's been going on for a while, and then yoga started up last year and that's become really popular. Actually, it gets sold out every weekend. And then a number of other things where we get people in. So we've got some local craftsmen who come in and do spoon carving and foraging. This year I think it's going to be a couple of times a month. Basket weaving, and then over the summer we do a 2 week summer camp for local children. We have up to about 40 children for that, and that's sort of 2 weeks of summer camp and forest school. And then we get a lot of people who come and do birthday parties, basically just doing a selection of things that we can offer. So what we're trying to do is kind of come up with as many crafts as we can to try and kind of engage people in and introduce them to either the natural environment or wood culture in some way. And I think, if we could get some sort of green woodworking in there, then I think that's probably the next thing we want to look at. So that's mainly for campers. The next thing we've started to look at is sort of opening that up more widely, trying to get corporate events going. And we've done a couple of trial runs with, we did one with Visit Kent and the National Landscapes Unit. And then we've also done one with school one where we were teaching a section on ecosystems and ecotourism. So I think does seem to be an appetite out there, and we're currently looking at a National Environment Investment Readiness Fund bid to try and understand how we might do more of that. So some of the figures we're getting 6,000 people. So busy weekends, about 250, 300 people. And over the course of the season, we get through about 2,000 bags of logs. So £12 a bag, we're getting about £480 a tonne for that, which when you compare that with normal firewood sales, certainly if we're selling wood to someone who's buying it to produce firewood, we might be getting £50 to £80 a tonne. So being able to sell it direct through the site is pretty significant for us. And then Swedish candles, which you can see there in the middle, we sell at about £15 each, and we only use softwood for that, and they've been pretty popular. So that actually, the sale of firewood really is what has given us the baseline to really get the forestry moving on the estate. So that's kind of underpinned everything. And you can see here the treehouse we built last year. So that was all built from Sweet Chestnut that we felled about 100 meters away from the site. And off the back of that, we started to supply chestnut poles to there's a local school and also a play manufacturer who are making similar sorts of structures. So not only has it been good for the fantastic space for the children, but it's possibly opening up another kind of avenue of sales. I mean, overall, we've only ever had direct bookings only, so we haven't had to go through any sort of third-party systems, which has been helpful in terms of maintaining a profit. And we've built up a sort of a social media following of about 7,000. We started a newsletter up a couple of years ago. But I think the key thing, perhaps, in terms of Woodland is we've got to a stage where the profit is around 1,000 to 2,000 per acre per year. So if I think about Sweet Chestnut, we currently are getting about £1,000 an acre for Sweet Chestnut standing, and that's 40 to 50-year-old Sweet Chestnut. So it's a significant increase in terms of the woodland income that they're able to get over an area. And we've started to engage a bit more. We've been working with Visit Kent in the last year or two. They had this sort of Impact Heroes section where they're looking at sustainability, so we've been engaging with that. And then we put ourselves forward for a campsite award. Sadly, we only got bronze, but it's a start. And then next, we've got a planning application in at the moment to sort of move things on a little bit. The current facilities are pretty basic, so our warden stays in a static caravan on site, and we've got an old container as the office and the shop. So we're looking to put in some basic buildings. Because of being in the green belt and the protected landscape, our kind of point of difference, special circumstances is the phrase, is that we will be building everything out of our own timber. So we're trying to showcase what you can do with Sweet Chestnut as much as possible. And we think we're not quite there yet, but we've reached agreement with the planning authority on the sort of scale of buildings. We've just got one last hurdle to get through, and then I think hopefully we will be there, and then looking to start building. Which brings me on to where we get our materials from. So we then, off the back of selling the firewood, which got the forestry going, we then put the sawmill in. So we managed to get some grant funding for that. We've got a bandsaw. We've also at the same time bought a 24-inch planer and a spindle moulder, thinking that we would be able to produce either flooring or cladding using that. The real aim being to maximise the value of the timber that we've got on site, and try and minimise the amount that was being sent off for biomass or firewood. It's not been a great success, if I'm honest. I think probably there hasn't been enough focus on marketing and the sales side of it. I haven't had enough time really to commit to it. I think at the end of the day, if all we ever manage to do is build our own buildings from it, then actually that will have been a success. I think we've got a bit of work to try and push the thing a bit harder. And then in last year, our forester who'd been here for a few years, he used to run training courses, retired. So we bought all his kit. So we've now invested in our own tractor and forwarder that we have ourselves. And then a chipper and a mulcher. So we've got kit to get a bit more stuck in rather than having to get a contractor in to do it. So here's our current team. On the left is Sam, who came as an apprentice, and he's been here for about 5 or 6 years now. So he's kind of our main forester. Mick in the middle has just this year, end of last year. He's been on the estate for 60 years. So the photo of him there is standing in a block that he planted with his father. And then they felled about 4 years ago, and then he replanted it for the second time. So it was a lovely story, that. And then Robin at the top spends the summer at the campsite, running bushcraft courses and sort of doing maintenance around the site. And then in the winter comes and joins the forestry team. And then down the bottom there on the right is Jamie Kirkman, who is the head forester over at Birling Estate, and he's now come over to help manage what we're doing here and try and push things on a bit for us. We joined up with Grown in Britain. I can't remember now. Probably when the sawmill started, so 5 years ago or so, and then recently with Woodland Heritage as well. I mean, there are probably lots of facts here that you all know, so I won't read through them. But I think the key thing is just, you know, the amount of we're not using the timber that we've got in the UK for building, you know, and we're having to import 80% of what we're using. We're second only to China in terms of volume, which seems extraordinary, really. So I think, you know, the more that we can do to use our own timber for construction to lock up the carbon, you know, and the less that we end up having to send to biofuel, I think the better. So, you know, I felt that for a while, so hence why we signed up with Grown in Britain. And then that kind of led on to this project, the Homegrown House. So that started off as a piece of research, I think, around trying to find interesting things to do with Sweet Chestnut, which was led by London Met School of Architecture. And so there was an initial discussion which I took part in, and then they were looking for a sort of partner to actually carry on some works on site. So we signed up with them and Grown in Britain for the kind of first phase, which was looking at a number of different ways that you might use chestnut. So we constructed a few, you know, tried a few different methods of sawing on the left-hand side, you can see, and that created these kind of basic prototypes. And then we were also working with a structural engineer called Mule Studios, and they then sort of turn, using some 3D modeling software, turn that into something more significant in terms of what that might look like, and then did some very basic structural analysis of it. So that was the sort of first phase, and we did a little sort of showcase in the woods so people could come see what was going on. And then the next phase we got some Forestry Commission innovation funding for. So it was the same group of us again, and that was looking at trying to. So the first one was about trying to come up with a sort of system that could be used in construction of homes, and trying to look at components. And then the second phase was to try and sort of trial one of those methodologies, and we decided to try and build a cabin as a way of sort of trying it out on a scale that was doable. So it was a combination of building these SIPS panels, which are structurally insulated panels, with then an ash lining, and we had a number of ash trees that we felled on site, some of which were slightly affected by ash dieback, and planked that up to see what sort of effect we would get with that. So we set aside a bit of the grain store as a workshop for a couple of months, and produced these sort of like I-beams, which then got turned into structural panels and then turned into an A-frame. And then we moved those around, and they all got mounted on this very large, I think it was redwood base. And then once that had been put together, that was then overclad. So there was a waterproof lining put over the top, and then just as a sort of trial, we just put some chestnut staves over the top to try it out, and then line the inside with ash. You can see, you can just about make out where the ash dieback had got in. You get some black lines through it. The timber itself was actually okay, but it was just slightly marked. So it seemed like in this sort of situation, it was quite a good use for it, where it's, you know, the sort of quality of finish is probably not such a big issue. So yeah, we sort of, unfortunately, the project ran out of time and money to complete it. We'd hoped to build the whole cabin and then go and trial it somewhere. And the planning permission at the campsite's taken about 4 times as long as we'd hoped it would. So the plan had been to move the thing up to the campsite as sort of cabin number 1. But we're still kind of going through that process at the moment. But that's the idea, really, is to try and use that either there or somewhere else on the estate. And working with London Met. So George, who was the professor at London Met, then kind of took the thing a bit further, and it ended up getting shortlisted for the pioneer category at the Structural Timber Awards, got into the Timber Trade Journal. He took it up to COP26 at one point. And there's now a book, I think, just coming out or just come out, The Regenerative Structural Engineer, and it's been used as a case study in there. So it's good to see it's had a bit of life that's gone on beyond the project. And then for us, what are we up to now? The next, sadly, the thing we're having to focus on this year is ash dieback. Really getting stuck in along footpaths. We've got IPS in some of the risk of it in the spruce, so there's a lot of spruce that's got to come out. So that's probably the main focus for this year, is those two areas. And we've just signed up, or in the process of trying to sign up to within countryside stewardship across the whole estate. So we've got stewardship across the land, and then WD2 on the forestry, which is then a mixture of management and then deer and squirrel control. And then the sawmill, now that Jamie's got involved from Balcombe, he runs a sawmill over there. So we're going to try and focus a bit more heavily on actually producing some products, as opposed to just planking it up and trying to work out some ways to get that out to market slightly better. And then starting to really think, as these planning permissions come through, what can we do in terms of building things with our own timber? And we'll see where that goes. Hopefully we'll build our cabins in house, and then maybe that becomes a product in itself. That's something that we can then sell on to other people if they're interested. And then through the project, the last one, Reading University School of Architecture have now got in touch, and they're keen to do something around grid shells. They've been doing some work on it for 2 or 3 years now, and they're interested in trialing grid shells using coppice material. So seeing how much closer you can get back to the woodland. I should say actually that the homegrown house project, part of the idea of that was trying to work out how to use smaller section timber, so it's smaller roundwood on a simple kind of farm or estate level sawmill. So rather than having to process timber through the larger sawmills, the idea was to try and sort of develop a set of components that could be set out for anyone who's got the timber and have got the sawmill to produce on their own. And I guess the sort of ultimate level would be you then have a register where this material is registered against, and people can buy these components to sort of construct a kit of parts. So that was that's where that was the background to that. So that's forestry, and then kind of more broadly across the estate, trying to see how everything ties in with each other. And I've got these sort of 4 areas particularly we're looking at the moment. So wood I've talked about. We're also looking at wine, wellness and wildlife. So vineyards we've been looking at for the last 20 years. That's just gone in this year along with a partner. Very frustratingly, I'd looked at putting Sweet Chestnut posts in, but it ended up being too expensive in the end, which was very frustrating. But we'll have to find some other way to get our material involved, possibly with some building works. We've got planning permission for a wellness centre and a Victorian wall garden, so that will be timber frame, and a good way to draw people in, and we're trying to engage them as much as possible with the natural environment, and hopefully if we can get more craft going on the estate linked to the sawmill, we might be able to start to produce some of the furniture that's used within there and use that as a way of kind of selling products that might be created around the estate. And then the last one is wildlife. We've set up or kind of initiated a local farm cluster to look at sort of wider landscape recovery. and we're looking at what we can do on the estate. There's particularly around wetlands and natural flood management. There's a few areas downstream that flood here, and we've got a lot of wet woodland. So we're just starting to investigate how that might all work, and then starting to think a bit more broadly about the kind of interaction between woodland and arable. So as we try and adjust the arable system slightly, is there more that we can do with the woods? For example, composting wood chip alongside grass, and possibly some ancient woodland soil to get the mycorrhizal fungi in there. Is there something that we can do with that? Or looking at biochar and production of charcoal that we can then use up at the campsite. So it's trying to think about how all these things kind of connect to each other. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're also looking at this Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund to see whether it's possible to draw private finance in to support some of this work, particularly with a view to engaging businesses in nature recovery and kind of expanding that kind of engagement either with the land or with the woods. And that's it from me. I hope it was interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. That was really interesting. There's a lot covered there. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. There've already been a few in the chat. So what we'll do is we'll just make sure that all the guests can unmute themselves. So I think we can lift their microphone ban. I think. Is that affected? Ali, your question was first up, and I know you think it's been answered. I just wonder whether you wanted to ask the question and kind of see whether Guy had a response in real time, so to speak. Ooh, I think you should be able to unmute now. You should definitely be able to unmute now. Okay, Ali's question was to do with kind of return on investments. She'd asked kind of what's your return on investment, and then you obviously mentioned about your kind of £1,000 to £2,000 an acre, and compared it with that, and she was pleased with that answer. But I just wondered if there's anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, so I think we're now getting about 100% return on investment. So we borrowed. I think it was somewhere between sort of 50 to 70,000. It's sort of back in the midst of time now, but that was the initial investment, and then we've been reinvesting an amount of money each year to kind of improve things. But that was the only time I've had to borrow money, was right at the beginning when we started it, and then since then everything else has been done out of revenue. So it's been a lot of work, but I think in terms of return on investment, it's been really good actually, and the fact that actually to kick it off it was very, very low, in real terms, compared with putting up a building or something like that. Oh, Rosanna, you're muted now.
Hopefully that's answered your question, Ali. I think there's a few individuals that are still muted, so we'll work in the background to try and resolve that. Rod asked a question around the forestry track, and you mentioned that you obviously had that existing track, and would the campsite been viable without the track? And I just wanted, how has the track influenced?
I think probably for us it would not have been viable without the track, simply because you need somewhere to park the cars. So I've seen other places where they've got woodland camping, but people have parked in a nearby field. We don't have a field next door. We've only got chalk grassland, and we obviously can't park on that because that's triple SI. So for us, it was a way to draw people into the woods, and everything's kind of screened from the road. I think it has helped. It certainly has helped, and it does mean that people can get around the woods more readily. But we have been upgrading the forest tracks over the last 2 to 3 years. So we were very lucky, I think, with what we had, but I think you can probably work around it. And I think I have seen other examples of woodland campsites where, you know, they probably haven't got that degree of infrastructure in there. It just depends on, I think if you're thinking about doing it, the thing to think about is, you know, where do you need to get the cars to? Our cars only go a certain distance in, you know, some of the pitches are 400 meters into the woods from there. So people load up a wheelbarrow and take the wheelbarrows in. So actually you only really need to be able to get to the edge, park the car somewhere, and then take everything in on foot from there.
Hopefully that's answered your question, Rod. I would say that I know there are different projects at the moment looking at new ways of doing kind of forestry tracks and also different funding streams as well. So if anyone is thinking about tracks, I'd say get in touch with either your forester or your local woodland officer, who should be able to advise you further. Alec, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. It was a question really about parking. You've answered some of it. Thank you for that. But from a planning point of view, you've got a lot of expansion planned, which is great. Are there any sort of particular planning conditions that are placed around parking and flow of traffic, an increase in flow of traffic that you know?
Yeah, it's one of the big things. I mean, I think with any project, it seems to be traffic and noise are the two things in particular. And I know from other campsites, I'm aware of smoke is the other thing. So certainly if you've got campfires, being very aware of, you know, where that might go, and there's a lot of them going at the same time, is very important. But yeah, we had to do, you know, traffic flow analysis. You end up having to get effectively a traffic consultant on board, and they will analyze, you know, recent accidents, you know, vision displays in and out, and look at, you know, what the traffic flow is like and how it's likely to be affected. So it does become a very important part of it. I think what we found was, you know, the reality is there might be, you know, 70 or 80 cars there, but they dribble in over the course of 2 or 3 hours. So actually the number of cars at any one time is pretty small. So actually traffic for us isn't really that much of an issue. And I think as long as you can kind of set that out in a sensible way, and you probably need to get a third party to do that for the planners to take that on board. Yeah. But it is very important to address it. Yeah.
And did the council require you to have any permanent base for a car park? So not in a field, basically. Did they ask you to put tarmac down?
They didn't in our case, because we had the road, we had the track through the woods, and I think because of its previous use, bizarrely, it had effectively little parking bays in between each coppice stall, right, off to the side of the road. I think during the war, it had been used for vehicle training purposes, so there were already these kind of car parking spaces in effect that we could use, which meant it was viable in the woods. I think generally it would probably be quite hard to get parking within the woodland, but I think if you've got a field next door, then that would be a much easier way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Alec. Rod, would you like to ask your question? I think you can now unmute.
Yes, I can unmute. Thank you for answering your question regarding the parking. I'm curious with your wooden structures why you didn't use cleft shingles, because obviously they're a very ancient and proven method of roofing. I was going to say it was too labour intensive.
In effect, yeah. I mean, it was a trial. We weren't really trialing the finish, actually. What we were really trialing was the structural use of timber, structural use of chestnut. So in the end, the cladding that we used, the staves that we used, was a sort of quick and easy way of trying to finish it, but in a way that kind of showcased chestnut to some degree. I think if we were going to do it again, and you were going to do it, shall I say, properly, then yes, I think shingles would be a really nice way to do it. But it was too labour intensive at the time. We were pretty short on time and money by the end of it.
Understood. Thanks.
Thanks, Rod. Alistair, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi there. Yeah, thank you. Sort of it's technology trying to get my phone stopped turning around. So we've got a very nice woodland, but it's a very, very wet woodland. It's on, unfortunately, it's on clay substrate. And one of the big things we've got is access. So I've thought about doing sort of running bushcraft courses and doing camping, but accessing the interior of the woodland is actually quite difficult. I saw some of the pictures of the paths going between your setup, and I wondered what you'd used, how effective it was during those sort of wet periods. And what things you were sort of recommended to put in by other people.
We've so all we've done, we've put wood chip down. So we've gone through, I mean, we do have to refresh it each year. Obviously we've got the main track in, which helps, but then where people are going in by foot, we just put wood chip on the main tracks through, and that's been going in for about probably the last 4 or 5 years. So it's almost got to a stage where it started to sort of build up a thickness to it. Okay. And that's proves to be a really good way to do it. And we I mean, there's a lot of it. You know, we probably get 100 builders bags a year that we're putting in. So there's a fairly significant amount, and we tend to do it with the conservation weekends. So you know, we've got a team of 20 people all with wheelbarrows whizzing around the woods for a day and a half. But you know, I think the thing with that is we found the kind of volunteering side's been great actually. You know, if you put on some food and a few beers afterwards, it's actually a really fun thing to go and do.
Yeah,
so it's quite a good way to engage people with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're quite fortunate. There's a lot of arborists around our area, and I'm sure looking for places to tip, certainly wood chip and things like that. It was how it sort of kind of functioned in the wetter areas of your woodland, and whether you found it was just useless and you had to divert the paths, or whether it actually gave a reasonably sound underfoot structure to be able to again sort of get on in.
Sometimes it just gets wet. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing you can do about it really. I think other than, as you say, try and find a slightly different route. I think I would just probably just look at the topography slightly, and it's not the shortest route in, but I think you've just got to be realistic about it. I would just say, I think if you're bringing in other people's waste, obviously you need to be quite careful about that in terms of waste substances, but also we were quite nervous about the sort of biohazard risk as well. So our previous forester who was involved was absolutely paranoid, and at one point we thought we had chestnut blight. About 4 years ago, I think, when the guidance at that point was to destroy everything within a kilometre.
Wow. Okay.
Which would have basically obliterated the entire woodland.
Yes.
So we were very careful. Not, you know, we basically say, please do not bring any wood onto our site.
Fine. I mean, that's a really good chat. I mean, we've got quite a lot of clearing to do, and I'm in the process of re-establishing a lot of hazel coppice. So there's quite a lot of wood that's coming out. So now would be a prime time to kind of actually make use of some of that brash wood it's not really any good for structural stuff, and it's just going to end up in a pile somewhere, to actually use it for access to other parts of the woodland. But yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thanks, Alistair. Emma, would you like to unmute and ask your question, and then we'll come to Rod after that?
Hi, thanks, Guy. That was a really interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it. I found myself a bit conflicted because I got really entranced with the camping, and I really liked the fact that the camping is sort of part of the diversification and encouraging the forestry, and isn't just becoming something different and becoming a campsite. But I find myself a little worried about the impacts on the biodiversity, and I see that I understand what you've said about the impacts of the military on the woodland, and having already had some amount of impact on it, so that you're sort of not starting from a really pristine woodland, but nonetheless using it as an exemplar to other people makes me think, gosh, what if this takes over everywhere, and what's the impact really on the biodiversity, and how much compaction is there from your pathways and your camping sites? I just wondered if you could help reassure me.
Yeah, no, sure. So there's probably 2 or 3 things. I mean, we worked, as I said, we worked closely with Kent Wildlife Trust. So we pulled together they pulled together a conservation plan for us, which was reviewed twice, I think. So after 5 years, to sort of see what the impacts have been. And I think compaction is a big issue. Certainly with the oak trees, it was an issue. The sweet chestnut doesn't seem to be affected by it, actually. The oaks, I think what happened initially is we sort of went into it at a very, very kind of simple level. And to begin with, it was kind of just find a space in the woods. It was a handful of people, find a space in the woods and pitch a tent, and then we'll all sort of figure it out from there, you know. And of course, what happened was people went in and they found a space, and the spaces tended to be under the oak trees because there was a bit more room there. So the pitches kind of naturally found themselves. And then what we started to find was we were getting compaction under the oak trees, and you could see the oak trees were starting to suffer. So what we started to do now is we probably about 4 or 5 years ago, as that started to become clear, we diverted a lot of the paths and we moved quite a lot of the pitches around and tweaked them. And we've put up sort of small posts and rails around some of wherever a path or a pitch ends up near to an oak tree. We now make it very, very clear where you walk and where you pitch, so that impact is much lessened. I think that the kind of overall impact, I think there's probably 2 things. One is in terms of sort of the next level, next stage, where we're going for planning to put buildings in. All of the buildings are on top of old hut bases that still remain. So we surveyed the whole site. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's something like 20 to 30% of the area is covered is got concrete bases sitting underneath. They'd all become covered over by sort of 4 inches of topsoil. But we've sort of been around and discovered where those are, surveyed those. And so, you know, again, working with Kent Wildlife, we were very clear that what we didn't want to do is damage the soil. So the key thing here is that, so for ancient woodland, it's the soil more than the trees that's important. And particularly in the case where we are, where it's chestnut coppice in the majority, because the trees have been coppice, you know, either on a 20-year or, you know, maybe for some of ours it's been a bit overstood, so a 50-year cycle. But the point is they're coming down. So then as individual trees, they're not, you know, there's not, probably you have to watch my words carefully, but the sort of the value of an individual tree is less, as it were. So obviously where you've got oak trees that have been around for a much longer period, you know, we're much more careful about what happens. So I think working through the process with Kent Wildlife, their conservation plan, the main thing that they wanted us to do was to make sure we kept coppicing. So we coppice a section every year on quite, you know, they tend to be quite small camps. So, you know, elsewhere in the woods, we might be doing 4 acres in one hit, in one block. Whereas here, it's might be half an acre at a time. So they're kind of much smaller parcels. And then I think the argument that I put forward the whole way through this has been, you know, we all acknowledge that there will be some damage. So, for example, there are some bluebells that are getting trampled, you know, when we created the pitches in the first place. But when you look at the woodland as a whole, the whole woodland's about 250 acres. The area with the campsite's about 30 acres. And when you look at the area of pitches across the whole 250 acres, it's less than 1% of the area of the whole woodland. And when you balance that out with introducing people into the woods to kind of marvel at them, to become engaged with them, to understand them, to promote them, to love them, I think that the overall impact is the other way around. So I think by engaging people with it more, by immersing them within it, you get people to care about what it is that we're trying to preserve. So I do appreciate that, you know, there is some impact, and there's not, you know, at one level there is nothing that we can do about that other than try to minimize the damage as much as possible, and try and kind of maximize the upside.
Oh, that's fantastic. Do you have deer where you are? Do you have to manage your deer for the coppice?
It's we do. We're just getting started, actually. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I'd have said no. We haven't had them at all. And in the last 10 years, they've started to arrive, and the pressure's definitely building. And we've through starting up this farm cluster, one of our neighbours runs a vineyard up there, and they're getting major pressure, and it's starting to become a problem with them. So we're starting to look at it on a more of a sort of landscape scale, and they are definitely moving in. I mean, you know, certainly our gamekeeper is out. We'll see them, every time he goes out, he'll see a deer now. So the pressure's definitely building. It's not a major issue yet, but I think it's coming.
Let's start selling some venison in your shop, and then you can close that educational loop at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's right. You know, I think it's all part of helping people to just understand the kind of holistic nature of everything that goes on, and the impact of, you know, seeing deer wandering through the woods is lovely, but you know, you don't want too many of them.
Sounds terrific. Thank you.
It's okay.
Thanks, Emma. Rod, do you want to answer your question? I think we're kind of, depending on Rod's question and the answer, we might have time for one more. So Rod.
Great. I mean, I've got potentially two questions relating to planning permission routes for camping on woodland. So the first one relates to the scheduling and rationale for woodland tracks. Obviously, if you've got woodland, you can, maybe I'm not using the right language, but you can go for permitted development and put a forestry track in relatively easily. You know, as far as I can tell, there's not very much bureaucracy around that, and like they have to approve it or whatever within 30 or 60 days. I'm imagining, but maybe you can confirm or disprove what my thinking, that it's much harder to put the same infrastructure in under, you know, as part of a, this enables us to put camping in. If you put the track infrastructure in under a general purpose forestry rationale, and once you've got that in, then you say, now we'd like to submit an application for camping, and it's viable because here are these, we've got these routes for moving people around in the woodland, which happen to be the forestry tracks. It's much better off doing it with the forestry tracks first before a camping permission, as opposed to the other way around.
I'm sure that's probably right. I mean, I think you need, you know, the point of the track is, if you, I mean, I don't know, but I would imagine the track needs to, you know, the woodland needs to be of a scale where a track is appropriate. So, you know, if you've got a track to give you access for extraction of timber, and that seems reasonable, then I think you would get permission. I think if you had a small piece of woodland and a track was probably unnecessary, then you know, I think the order of play might make it a bit tricky. I mean, I think what we did is we did the whole thing just bit by bit. So, you know, we tried it on a 28-day notice. I think now you can do 60 days. So I think that's changed following COVID. I think you have to register it with the local authority, but you can trial it on a 60-day basis. And then we went for a temporary permission after that. So all buildings were temporary. And again, it's sort of just saying, look, we'll try it and see whether there's any, you know, do people feel there's impacts? Do local residents have a problem with it? If that's okay, then you can kind of move up to the next level. And I think in a way it makes it a bit less scary for everybody from the point of view of, you know, I think from a planning point of view, they are, you know, they obviously they have certain things that they need to try and achieve, but at one level, I think that they need to be in a position where if they're going to approve something, they've checked off everything. So if someone comes to you and says, well, have you thought about, why have you given them permission? You haven't thought about this. You know, they need to have been through that process and to have thought about it. So I think trying to do anything that's kind of too big and scary from the off will be really tricky. And I think also from the point of view of your own investment, you know, we started off small. You know, the initial investment was tiny. We literally had just a normal, you know, touring caravan that we'd borrowed that went into the woods for the weekend. You you know, and people came in, and we opened up for a few weekends and just tried it to see whether, you know, did it feel like the right sort of experience? Did it feel like the right sort of place? What was the feedback? You know, and it just had simple portaloos at that point, very, very basic. And then it's been a sort of slow move over time to put more in. And I think with all these things, you've got to be careful not to overdo it. You know, there's always a temptation to keep building and adding, and you know, maintaining the kind of you know, the feel of space and the feel of being in the woods, and the sort of the basic nature, the sort of back to nature side of it's really, really important. So I guess I'd probably advocate a sort of step-by-step approach to it.
That makes perfect sense. The second part of my question circumvents, if I understand correctly, planning permission, the planning permission requirements, and that is going by the camping and caravanning club route. Did you consider that?
I did look at it. The only thing with that is anyone who books has to be a member of the club. So I think that's just a decision you just have to look at and take a view on whether you think that, you know, you'll get enough bookings from that group of people, or whether you want to open things up more widely. I think when we started, we partnered with someone who's running a couple of campsites elsewhere for the first year, and then that wasn't working that well, so we then sort of took it under our own wings after that, and kind of ran with it. So yeah, I think it sort of depends on where you think the bookings might come from. There's lots of booking sites around now, so I think actually, you know, finding someone like PitchUp or someone like that, or you know, you can do things through Airbnb. There's lots of access to people now, but obviously they'll take 15 to 20% of your booking fee.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Rod, and thank you everyone for the questions. If you do have any others, feel free to send them in after the chat, and we'll see if we can twist Guy's arm to maybe provide some written responses. If there's any more, I realise there was a lot packed into his presentation, and I'm sure that you might all go and reflect on something, so do send them in. So we'll just wrap up then. Guy, thank you very, very much it's been a fascinating hour with a lot of different topics touched on. We touched on tree health, we've touched on tracks in particular. So if anyone does have any further questions, I would really encourage you to reach out to your Forestry Commission woodland officer or your forester. Equally, if you want to reach out to Northwoods, we'll be very happy to signpost you in the right direction. These are all important topics. So yes, don't feel like you're in isolation. There's a lot of resources and people out there to help you. I think I'd like to just focus on a point that we mentioned in kind of before we started with Guy, and that's the collaboration. You know, you've worked with a lot of different people in different ways, and I think that's been really exciting to see, and I think it must have really increased the impact of the woods. But I think that's a nice point to kind of end on, is that, you know, it's been really positive and really impactful, but that's increased because of the collaborative partnerships you've had with local, you know, your farm clusters, or with, you know, the London Metropolitan School of Architecture. You know, it doesn't really matter who they are, that it's all kind of increased positive impact. So that's a really nice note to end on. Thank you all very much for attending. The recording will be sent out, and we'll also just ask for a little bit of feedback. If you really liked it, or if you think there's things we can improve upon, please do let us know. And I'll just finish with, we have another webinar at the same time next week. We're looking at tech and how we can take inventories of trees and woods using phones and iPads. So we'll be with Evolving Forests and Arboreal Forest, who'll be talking us through the application to help owners and managers undertake inventories using, yeah, as I say, phones and iPads. It'll just be exciting. Slightly different theme, but we'll be back here at 5 o'clock next week. So you can book via Eventbrite, as you will have done with this event as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.